Well, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us on this Monday morning, which is the morning, as you all know, the 19th of September 2022. It is the day of the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, now of blessed memory in London today. But for our part, we're looking at some other programming as different sections of TVC carry that blanket coverage. Now, our guest this morning, our guests, as a matter of fact, we have, because we wanted to talk about the ongoing fight against insecurity. And by insecurity here, I'm talking about corruption and waste. In fact, as you can see there, curbing corruption and waste is our focus today, the role of the Nigerian accountant. Our guests are experts, both of them. First is Professor Canon Benjamin Osisioma, Professor Emeritus of Accounting at Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Awka. Good morning, Canon. Thank you very much for coming on the program today.
Thank you very much. You're welcome, viewers.
Indeed, it is our pleasure. He's President, Chairman of Council Association of National Accountants of Nigeria. And we also have Dr. Kayode Fashua. Dr. Kayode Fashua is past DG, Nigerian College of Accountancy, and the Chief Executive Officer, Association of National Accountants of Nigeria. And as I said, he's the immediate past DG of the Nigerian College of Accountancy. Thank you very much, Doctor, for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Indeed, our pleasure.
Good morning, viewers.
And Prof. By way of, sort of preparing for this, just looking at, everybody knows what an accountant is. You think you know what an accountant is. You think you know what an accountant does. You might not be an accountant yourself. But the International Federation of Accountants, I was just looking at their website, and a fair bit ago, maybe up to 5-7 years ago, they had commissioned a study, and just a little paragraph there caught my attention. So I brought it into the studio here. It says, and I'm quoting directly, "Where governance is strong, the role played by professional accountants in tackling corruption is amplified." I'll just leave it at that. There's much more. But where governance is strong, the role played by professional accountants in tackling corruption is amplified. So I'm going to ask the Canon, Prof, what is the strength of governance in our environment? Because I want to use that conny way to begin to assess, how, since they say if it is strong, the role, I want to begin to find out how amplified, the function of the accountants is. If it is strong, they say it will be amplified. And I imagine that if it's not strong, you can guess the rest.
Thank you very much. I can tell you very quickly that part of the problem we face today in Nigeria, and indeed not just Nigeria, the whole of Africa, we have a collapse of good governance. There's also a challenge in diverse ways. There are character problems, there are professional challenges. All these things add up to the problem we have with corruption. Let me put it this way. What does the accountant do? He sets out the plan. He puts things in place to monitor performance, measure adequacy of performance, set out key performance indicators that will enable us to know whether the performer, those who are performing have done well or not, and then monitor these things and evaluate. That's what the accountant does. But where the system
and
does
there are
not,
international best practices
yes,
that professional accountants are trained to
they set up the system.
To set up the system.
We call it internal controls and all that it involves. And the checks and balances are built into the system. But where those checks and balances collapse, and I can tell you that they face such challenge in the Nigerian situation, where people can bypass, when there is executive overrule of certain controls, there are controls in place, but the executive can overrule. These are some of the things that make it possible for the accounting function not to do what it ought to do.
I see.
There is also the character problem,
Okay.
which is always there at whatever we are doing. There is the character problem. No man can give what he does not have. If a person does not have the character, he does not have it. He gets into position, he will exploit that position for his personal benefits. So these are some of the challenges we face. But I'm sure that as we go on in this program, we'll elaborate.
Indeed. So, Dr. Fashua, bringing it to you, and I started off with a quote from IFAC there. If I could just continue with another brief quote to help us out. It says that that body, that Federation of Accountants, of which, by the way, both of you are members.
Yes.
Both of you are members. It says that professional accountants are part of governance architecture that tackle corruptions. Their positive contribution is amplified where the architecture is stronger. The link between the prevalence of professional accountants in the workforce and more favorable scores on the main global measures of corruption is stronger, it says here, in G20 countries and in countries that have adopted anti-money laundering laws in line with international recommendations. So, following from what Prof has said, that we have challenges locally here about some of these matters. The accountant and accountancy as a profession is not in a position to insist on laws being in a certain way so that they can do their best work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So what would you say is our way out of this? Because we've heard from the Prof that when it comes to the whole matter of moralities and all of that, we still have some way to go. Accountants must be advisors, hopefully, to government and governance processes as to this is the right way to go. But in the famous words of President Obasanjo, former President Obasanjo, he says, advisors can advise. It's up to me whether I want the advice or whether I'm going to take it or not. Do accountants face a similar problem?
Anyway, thank you very much. The truth is that the accountants actually face similar problems. That is why you find some accountants ask for hazard allowance. There was a time there was an agitation for hazard allowance because of executive overrides. The accountant carries out his duty according to his professional ethics. And his function is actually a staff function, not a line function.
Okay.
And
what's the difference?
The difference is that for the staff function, it supports.
Okay.
The line functions are those at the forefront. For instance, in the hospital, for instance, the doctors, the medical doctors are the line operators.
Okay.
And so you find accountants everywhere who give staff functions, who carry out staff functions, who give support. And what they do is to give advice. Those advice may not be accepted and may be accepted. But the duty of the accountant is to ensure that he carries out his functions diligently in line with the ethical process of what an accountant should do. So when the accountant finds himself in such situation most of the time, he just does his best. The highest you could do when you know that you are going to be overridden by your superior is to have these things documented.
Okay.
And this part of what accountants have actually been going through. For instance, you talk about accountants, you also talk about auditors. Auditors are also essentially accountants anyway. Like I used to say this, if we're really serious about curbing corruption in government, for instance, I think the Civil Service Commission or whichever body is responsible should strengthen the internal audit function much more than it is today.
Okay.
You talk about EFCC now, anti-corruption agency, whatnot. They only come in when the deed has been done. But the best thing to do is to ensure that the deed is not done.
Okay.
And how that can be handled is one of the way it can be handled is through your internal audit functions. So the internal auditor carries out what we call prepaid audit, for instance. Nothing goes out without him also seeing, giving his own input into it. But if you find out that in the public service, for instance, the internal auditor, like I call it, is an endangered species. He is not liked by his colleagues. The chief executive that he is protecting can easily override him. The external auditor who will come and assess the function, their books after a period of time, pushes him aside. And so the guy sees no evil, hears no evil, and does no evil.
Oh, dear.
So, so these are actually some of the things, like you said, the accountants go through. And in Anand, for instance, we have regular training and retraining to give them what they should know how to do part-time.
Okay. Prof, coming back to you, and I think I understand it a teeny-weeny bit better than before we started the program, following what you had said and what he has said. Because I want to ask you now that when we hear of these mind-boggling cases of corruption in Nigeria, complete with figures, a lot of people will be wondering, how could this happen if there are accountants who are usually gatekeepers? We've heard about accountants. We've also heard about auditors that are essentially in the same family as a kind of accountant. And so when you hear this monumental figure of stealing of billions of naira in public institutions, you begin to wonder, how could that happen when there are accountants in the place? You can't just, I was thinking, leapfrog over an accounting hurdle and have your way. But in Nigeria, we must have devised a way to do so. How is that?
Well, thank you very much. Actually, I've always been of the opinion that for any fraud to succeed, there's a level of connivance that is needed for the accountant to be part of it. Let me put it this way. Okay. If a school principal wants to embezzle money, he must have a good working relationship with his bossa. If he doesn't, he'll be in trouble. It'll be very, very difficult. He'll be in trouble.
If not impossible.
But you see, the thing there is, like we have just said, the accounting function is essentially a service function, staff function. It's a reporting function. It's a stewardship function. In other words, someone has your assets and he has been using it for your benefit, presumably. It's left to the accountant to report. Is he doing it well or not? A lot depends on the report of the accountant, but it can be ignored. You see, the most potent tool that the accountant has is his report. The reporting function is a key factor in influencing the direction of the enterprise. But he can report and it can be ignored.
I was going to ask that when he has done his report, what if it is simply put under,
Exactly.
Just so effectively ignoring it?
What we usually say is, in that case, is make sure it's well documented. One day somebody will dig it up. There was a case where we were talking about the internal auditor. An internal auditor who raised reports that embarrassed the chief executive. And he consigned him to the store. Just dumped him in the store where nobody would hear of him. But much later, a new board was raised. I don't know how the board chairman stumbled on the report of the auditor and brought it to the board meeting. The man who prepared this report, is he still in this organization? They said, yes, bring him up. That was how the report was exhumed and acted upon. You see, the important thing in a record is that it's a permanent record.
Okay.
Keep it there.
Okay.
It may or may not be used. You see, the accountant cannot perform a miracle. You cannot change the grain of the Nigerian. That's why I said there's a character problem too. You will do your bit.
Oh dear.
You will do your bit.
You can't change the DNA of a Nigerian.
Yes, you can't.
The DNA is already there. Oh dear. Oh dear.
But we have our own duty to do, and we must do it. And we don't make any excuses for that. We hold our members responsible to make sure that they do what they ought to do. Prepare your reports in good style. Document them. Send them to those who, ought to use them to act. If they don't act, the fault is not on you.
Yeah.
But you have raised the necessary report.
Now, what can the accounting profession or accountants do? Because our caption is trying to curb corruption and waste with the accounting function. And as we've now heard, it's not always that the accountant is the chief executive officer. So he still has someone to work up to. I was reading, I caught a link there that where the laws against money laundering are tight, a lot less is possible. So what, beyond what Prof has just said, that prepare your report, keep it, it might or might not be used. Now, I imagine people who are bad guys, that will be good news to them. That, look, so far you want to do this, just make sure that, the man is not too senior or whatever. I don't know. I'm just looking at what can the accounting professional do, because he doesn't have law on his side. If I'm not wrong, if I am, please don't hesitate to point it out. He doesn't have law on his side where I have spoken, I have written my report, and you can't go beyond this until this approach is addressed. The accountant doesn't have that power, I imagine.
Yeah, like I said earlier, the accountant cannot go beyond that. But there are things that he can also do. Instead of waiting also for when somebody will discover it later, I mentioned the external audit function earlier.
Okay.
The truth is that the way external auditors should work when they come into an organization, after, for instance, meeting with the chief executive that, okay, we're here for this assignment, the next port of call should be the internal auditor.
Okay.
Now, where the internal auditor, for instance, or maybe the accountant now, in this case, is having a running battle with his chief executive, the auditors too will also have consultation with the accountant. And he can use that opportunity to let the auditors know about the red flags that they can look into, because those are the people that can bring the chief executive to book. And so he needs to explore that particular angle as well.
That is by the processes that they shall
exactly,
engage.
Yes. Now, of course, you know that there's a whistleblowing act too that was probably enacted some times back. I don't know how much people make use of those acts. In Nigeria, the issue with us is there are laws, but those laws are really not implemented. And even where they're implemented...
Not all the time.
Not all the time. And even where they're implemented, there seems to be no zeal around it. So the thing the accountant can do, because he has somebody that he's working under, because in this case, he's not the chief executive, is to look for a third party to be able to make sure that he covers his track. You keep your own record. You have relationship with the external auditor. If you have opportunity with the whistleblowing process in place, you make use of it. So
the moral character of the headship of the company also comes into, it also plays into this. Because if the headship wishes to frustrate the accountant, wishes to frustrate the internal auditor, I didn't know before that he can go right ahead and do so. Unfortunately, this is where the vibe I'm getting.
Actually, the reports of the auditor can eventually bring him down.
If it is discovered.
At some point.
Like this accidental way.
That's why we are talking about strong governance structure.
Okay.
There must be a system for holding the chief executive accountable. He cannot be a law unto himself. We've always asked the question, who guards the guards? There are people who are put there to oversee, to superintend over the performance of the system. Who guards them? So the thing there is that these reports are sure tools that can be brought against them. How does EFCC operate? EFCC depends on how honestly and sincerely the man at the helm of affairs wants to address the issues raised.
Okay.
If he's conscientiously pursuing them, the work of the accountant and the auditor will be a great help.
Okay.
But if not interested, there's nothing you can do. But the work of the auditor will help him if he wants to act.
You know, this is...
When you hear that somebody has been brought to book for embezzling how many billions, how do you get that information? It's the documentation,
It's the
that the
documentation.
accountant has brought in. Let me give you a little example. In a system where I was, both of us were in that system. Someone was in charge of the accounts, and we had somebody who took collected the cash and transferred to the accountant for storekeeping. But we asked the cashier, each time you take money to him, enter it into the books and ask him to sign for you. At some point, the boss refused to sign for her,
Yeah.
but was taking the money. But the girl conscientiously continued documenting the money she was giving to him. And when the money disappeared and the man wanted to deny, it was the records of that little girl that helped us to hold him to account. I'm using a very small
Yes,
system,
yes, yes, as
but
an
that's the
indication.
kind of thing that happens. Even the documentation of the accountant, that's why I say the greatest tool of the accountant is that reporting tool.
Now, all of that is where everything is working properly. Well, what if the accountant and the auditor go into bed with the CEO? Then there's a fiesta. No, now, since you laid it out for me, it is not expected. In fact, you just said that the internal auditor, quite frankly, he's in the unfortunate position of not being liked by anybody, by the nature of his job. But we're also assuming that these people can remain like that because, come what may, they will do their jobs. They will not hop into bed. There will be no collusion. Because you said, sir, that you're of the mind that wherever there is a fraud, the accounting personnel, when you look at them, you will find that their hands might not be clinically clean.
Well, I would say that they're not clear because they may have made reports and the reports were ignored.
Okay.
But there's no way you can do it without their knowing. And if you want to trace it, you need their help.
Okay, there's no way a fraud can happen without the accounting function knowing
Exactly.
that something fishy is going on here. Okay, I'll take a short break. Stay with us, please. We'll be right back.